Long before planes crossed the skies or trucks rumbled down highways, goods traveled across continents in ways that would astonish us today. Picture a handful of precious cinnamon from Sri Lanka passing through countless hands, merchants, sailors, camel drivers, each risking their lives to carry it across deserts, mountains, and stormy seas until it finally reached the markets of ancient Rome. That cinnamon wasn't just a spice, it was a symbol of an invisible web connecting distant civilizations, a network so vast and intricate that it shaped the course of history. These forgotten trade routes were the lifelines of the ancient world, carrying not just goods but ideas, religions, and innovations that still echo in our lives today. What if I told you that the tea in your cup, the silk in your clothes, or even the words you're hearing right now might trace their origins back to these lost pathways? Hidden beneath modern cities and buried in the sands of time lie the remnants of once thriving trade hubs, cities like Palmyra, a glittering oasis in the Syrian desert, or Musa, the legendary Indian port swallowed by the sea. These places were more than stops along a journey. They were melting pots where cultures collided, languages blended, and empires rose and fell. The merchants who traveled these routes weren't just traders, they were explorers, diplomats, and sometimes even spies, carrying secrets as valuable as the goods they sold. But why does this matter now? Because these ancient networks didn't just disappear, they evolved. The same spices that fueled medieval economies still flavor our food today. The same silk routes that made fortunes now inspire modern trade agreements, and the courage of those early travelers. It's a reminder that curiosity and connection have always driven humanity forward. So join me as we unravel the mysteries of these forgotten highways, from the incense trails of Arabia to the amber roads of Europe. Together, we'll uncover how a world separated by thousands of miles was bound together by something as simple as a merchant's promise, and how those bonds still shape us in ways you've never imagined. Think of the Silk Road not as a single dusty trail, but as a pulsing network of countless pathways, each one buzzing with the energy of a world in conversation. While silk might be the most famous traveler along these routes, it was far from alone. Spices like pepper and cinnamon, precious metals like gold and silver, even exotic animals like peacocks and lions, they all crisscrossed continents in a grand exchange that reshaped societies. But perhaps the most astonishing cargo wasn't something you could hold in your hands. Ideas moved just as swiftly as any merchant's caravan. Buddhism journeyed from India to China, carried by monks who braved towering mountain passes. The secrets of papermaking traveled westward, revolutionizing how knowledge was preserved. Even the stars above were part of this trade. Astronomical knowledge from Babylon and Greece found its way to the scholars of Samarkand, blending with local wisdom to create new maps of the heavens. One of the most striking testaments to this cultural melting pot lies in the Tarim Basin, where the eerily preserved mummies of Xinjiang tell a story no history book could. With their European features and brightly woven textiles, these ancient people remind us that the Silk Road was never just about China and Rome. It was a tapestry of countless threads, from nomadic horsemen to Persian glassmakers. A single tomb might hold a Greek-style woolen tunic, a Han Dynasty mirror, and a Mesopotamian bead, all resting together as if the world had always been connected. And then there were the city's oases of commerce where languages mixed as freely as spices in a market stall. Take Chang'an, the glittering eastern terminus of the Silk Road. Here you could hear Sogdian merchants haggling in the streets, see Syrian acrobats performing for Tang Dynasty nobles, or stumble upon a Nestorian Christian church standing quietly beside a Zoroastrian fire temple. These weren't just trade hubs, they were laboratories of human connection where a single handshake could bridge continents. The legacy of these exchanges lingers in unexpected places next time you play a game of chess. remember that its ancestors crossed the Silk Road, evolving from Indian chaturanga to Persian shatranj before reaching European tables. Every roll of the dice carries echoes of that ancient network. The Baltic Sea's golden treasure didn't glitter like gold, it glowed. For thousands of years, this ancient region produced amber, fossilized tree resin that captured sunlight in honey-colored depths. But amber wasn't just a pretty trinket, it became the lifeblood of one of Europe's most astonishing trade networks. Picture Viking ships heavy with raw amber nuggets sailing south along the Vistula River, where Celtic traders waited to transport it further. Some pieces traveled so far they ended up in Tutankhamun's tomb, carved into scarabs that still gleamed when archaeologists uncovered them 3,000 years later. What made this sticky substance so valuable? Beyond its beauty, ancient people believed amber held magical properties. The Greeks called it electron, noting how it attracted dust when rubbed, an early observation of static electricity. Roman physicians powdered it for medicines, while Germanic tribes burned it as sacred incense. But the real power of amber lay in its ability to connect wildly different cultures. A single necklace might pass from the hands of a Baltic craftsman to a Phoenician merchant sailing to Egypt, each exchange adding value and meaning. The Amber Road wasn't a single path but a shifting web of river routes, coastal trails, and mountain passes. Recent excavations in Poland revealed a 3,000-year-old trading post where hundreds of amber pieces were found alongside Mediterranean bronze, proof of how early this network thrived. By the time the Romans built their empire, amber had become a political weapon. Emperor Nero's obsession with it led to a failed military expedition north, while later Roman diplomats used amber gifts to negotiate with Germanic tribes. Perhaps most fascinating are the unexpected places amber surfaced. In ancient Mycenae, warriors were buried with Baltic amber beads. At a Celtic chieftain's feast in France, amber cups held wine. Even the legendary Amber Room of Prussia, later gifted to Peter the Great, traced its origins back to these prehistoric trade routes. Every golden fragment carried a story of risk and ingenuity, of merchants braving pirate-infested waters and crossing frozen rivers to satisfy humanity's oldest craving, the desire for beautiful, rare things that make us feel connected to something greater than ourselves. The next time sunlight catches on amber jewelry, remember, you're holding a piece of history that once traveled farther than most people dreamed possible, linking the frosty Baltic shores to the sun-baked temples of the Mediterranean in a silent exchange that shaped civilizations. There's a reason frankincense and myrrh were gifts fit for a king. These aromatic treasures were the desert's liquid gold. Imagine bundles of fragrant resin, carefully harvested from scraggly trees in southern Arabia, loaded onto camels for a journey so perilous it could take months. The incense route wasn't just a path, it was a gauntlet of scorching sands, bandit ambushes, and shifting dunes that swallowed entire caravans, yet the rewards were staggering. At its peak, a single pound of frankincense could cost as much as a Roman soldier earned in half a year. The secret to this trade lay in control. Nomadic tribes like the Nabateans didn't just guide caravans, they mastered the desert's cruel arithmetic. They knew where to find hidden wells, how to navigate by stars, and when to demand payment for safe passage. Their greatest creation, Petra, the rose-red city carved into cliffs, where towering temples and bustling markets thrived on taxes from passing merchants. Walking through Petra's narrow sick with canyon walls soaring overhead, you can almost hear the echoes of camels' bells and the haggling over sacks of resin that smelled like heaven itself. But why were these scents so coveted? Beyond their use in temples where smoke curled upward to carry prayers to the gods, frankincense and myrrh were the ancient world's ultimate status symbols. Roman elites burned them to mask the stench of crowded cities. Egyptian embalmers used them to preserve pharaohs, and doctors from Greece to India prescribed them for everything from headaches to childbirth. The demand was so insatiable that when the Roman Empire's treasury ran low, Pliny the Elder grumbled that Arabia was draining Rome of its silver. Modern technology is now revealing just how vast this network was. Satellite images show faint trails stretching over 1,100 miles from Yemen's misty highlands to the Mediterranean coast. Archaeologists have uncovered way stations buried under sand, their walls still stained with soot from cooking fires. Some of the most startling finds, ancient ID wooden passes issued by the Nabateans to merchants, proving they'd paid their taxes. Even today, when researchers dig up a clump of resin in a distant Roman villa, it's not just a relic, it's a receipt from a journey that changed the world. The next time you catch the scent of incense, remember, that aroma once crossed deserts on the backs of camels, funded kingdoms, and linked shepherds in Oman to emperors in Rome. It's proof that even in the harshest landscapes, humanity will always find a way to connect and trade. Far to the south of the Mediterranean's bustling ports, a different kind of treasure was moving across the world's largest desert. While medieval Europe struggled through turmoil, West African empires were quietly amassing staggering wealth not through conquest but through trade. The Sahara might seem like an impassable barrier, but for centuries it was a highway for caravans carrying gold so pure it dazzled even the most jaded sultans. Mansa Musa, the legendary ruler of Mali, understood the power of this trade better than anyone. When he embarked on his famous pilgrimage to Mecca in 1324, he didn't travel light. His caravan stretched as far as the eye could see, with hundreds of camels laden with gold, so much gold that when he stopped in Cairo, the local economy crashed from the sudden influx. But this wasn't just a display of wealth. It was proof of a sophisticated network that connected sub-Saharan Africa to the wider world long before European explorers set foot on the continent. The real secret of the Trans-Saharan trade wasn't just gold, it was salt. In the sweltering markets of Taghaza, slabs of salt mined from the desert's heart were worth their weight in gold to kingdoms further south. A single camel could carry 300 pounds of salt, and a full caravan might include thousands of animals. But this wasn't a one-way exchange. African gold flowed north to mint the dinars that powered Mediterranean trade, while books, textiles, and scholars traveled south, transforming cities like Timbuktu into hubs of learning. Walk through the quiet halls of Timbuktu's ancient libraries today, and you'll find crumbling manuscripts that tell a story the history books often miss. Here, amid delicate pages of astronomy treatises and legal texts, is evidence of an intellectual exchange as vibrant as any Silk Road marketplace. African mathematicians refined algebra, astronomers mapped the stars, and poets wrote verses that rivaled Persia's finest, all possible because of the trade routes that brought paper and ideas across the dunes. What makes this route so extraordinary is how it defies stereotypes. While Europeans imagined Africa as a land cut off from the world, caravans were threading the desert, linking the Niger River's bustling ports to the Mediterranean's glittering cities. A single gold dinar minted in Venice might pass through Tunis, cross the Sahara on a camel's back, and end up in the hands of a Malian merchant who'd trade it for salt that would eventually season a feast in Lisbon. This wasn't isolation, it was globalization centuries before the term existed. The next time you see a medieval map with empty space where Africa should be, remember, those blank spaces were never truly empty. They were alive with the footsteps of caravans, the rustle of manuscripts, and the quiet clink of gold-changing hands prove that even the harshest landscapes couldn't stop humanity's relentless drive to connect. High in the Himalayas, where the air grows thin and paths cling to cliffsides, one of history's most improbable trade routes thrived, not despite the danger but because of it. The Tea-Horse Road wasn't just a trail for merchants, it was a fragile thread holding empires together. Picture Tibetan ponies sturdy enough to survive the mountain cold, exchanged for delicate bricks of fermented tea from Yunnan. This wasn't barter, it was statecraft. Chinese emperors needed warhorses to defend against northern nomads, while Tibetan rulers craved tea's stimulating warmth, so vital it became currency. A single horse could fetch over 100 pounds of tea, with prices fluctuating like a modern stock market based on political tensions and harvests. The real marvel of this route wasn't the goods but the trust woven into every transaction. At way stations perched above dizzying gorges, deals were sealed with rituals as precise as any treaty. Tea bricks pressed with imperial seals were broken before witnesses to prove quality. Horses underwent days of inspection, teeth checked, stamina tested before being led across rope bridges so precarious that a spooked animal could doom an entire caravan. These exchanges were so vital that during conflicts, both sides often spared tea horse traders, knowing the route's collapse would hurt everyone. Now, climate change is revealing the road's secrets. Melting glaciers expose frozen way stations where merchants once huddled around fires. Archaeologists find teacups with traces of butter tea still inside, horse bridles decorated with turquoise, and ledger sticks notched with records of debts centuries old. Most haunting are the textiles' woolen cloaks preserved in ice, their dyes still vibrant, telling stories of weavers who'd never meet the drinkers of their tea. What makes this route extraordinary is how it redefines power. While kings waged wars over territory, the real influence often lay with the traders who navigated landslides and bandits to keep the peace. When tea shipments slowed, Tibetan monasteries sent envoys to negotiate rather than raid. When horses grew scarce, Chinese generals paid premiums instead of invading. The road's legacy lingers today in unexpected ways, from the butter tea sipped in Lhasa cafes to the endurance of Himalayan pony breeds that still carry goods where roads can't reach. Next time you steep a cup of tea, consider this. That simple leaf once crossed some of Earth's most unforgiving terrain, not just as a commodity but as a diplomat. It's proof that even in a world divided by mountains and mist, humanity has always found ways to trade not just goods but peace. The Roman ships that braved the Indian Ocean didn't just carry goods, they carried the heartbeat of an interconnected ancient world. Picture a Roman merchant in the 1st century, nervously watching the horizon from Egypt's Red Sea ports, waiting for the monsoon winds to shift. One wrong calculation, and his vessel laden with glassware and wine could vanish beneath the waves. But if he timed it right, the very winds that terrified sailors would become his highway, propelling him straight to India's spice-rich shores in under 40 days, a journey that previously took a year. This wasn't just trade, it was a seasonal dance with nature, one that linked continents with a precision that would impress modern logistics experts. The treasures unearthed along this route read like a catalogue of ancient desires. In Pompeii's ash-preserved kitchens, archaeologists found peppercorns from Kerala, still fragrant after 2,000 years. On Sri Lanka's beaches, farmers still stumble upon Roman coins stamped with emperors' faces, gold solidi, that once bought entire shiploads of cinnamon. But perhaps no discovery captures the scale of this trade like the Belitung Shipwreck off Indonesia. Here, beneath coral-crusted timbers, lay a 9th century Arab dhow packed with 60,000 Tang dynasty ceramics, delicate bowls painted with peonies, ewers shaped like pomegranates, even a cobalt blue flask adorned with Persian-style dancers. This single vessel was a floating department store, its cargo destined for Baghdad's elite during Islam's golden age. What made this network revolutionary wasn't just the distance, it was the middlemen who made it work. Tamil merchants in southern India acted as brokers, translating between Roman and Chinese traders who never met. The Kushan Empire, straddling modern Afghanistan, minted coins with Greek, Persian, and Brahmi inscriptions to ease transactions. Even the winds had intermediaries. Arab navigators guarded secret monsoon charts like trade secrets, selling their knowledge to the highest bidder. Yet for all its sophistication, this was no utopia. Roman senators complained about silver draining east to pay for Indian luxuries, while Tamil poems mocked Roman envoys sweating in wool robes unsuited for tropical heat. Smugglers thrived too. Dig through ports like Arakamdu in India, and you'll find amphorae with fake Roman seals, evidence of ancient counterfeiters. The legacy of this maritime web remains startlingly relevant. When you sprinkle pepper on your meal, you're tasting a flavor that once fueled empires. When you track a modern cargo ship via satellite, you're witnessing the spiritual descendant of those monsoon-chasing traders. And when economists talk about globalization, they're describing a phenomenon those Roman merchants would have understood perfectly, just without the shipwrecks. Sometimes the past surfaces literally. In 2006, fishermen off Zanzibar hauled up something astonishing, a clay pot, its lid still sealed after centuries underwater. Inside weren't jewels or coins, but perfectly preserved cloves from Indonesia, proof that even the smallest spices could circle the globe long before we called it globalization. That humble pot holds a lesson. The ancient world wasn't a collection of isolated cultures, but a humming network of risk-takers and deal-makers who shaped history as surely as any emperor. Their story isn't just about trade routes, it's about the invisible threads that have always bound us together across oceans and centuries. Along the frozen edges of medieval Europe, where ice cracked like thunder underfoot, a different kind of commerce thrived, one built on the softest furs and the hardest ivory. The Vikings didn't just raid, they built a shadow economy stretching from the Arctic Circle to the palaces of Constantinople. Picture a Norse trader in Novgorod haggling over Arctic fox pelts so white they gleamed like snow under torchlight. Those furs weren't just warm, they were status symbols destined for the shoulders of Byzantine nobles who'd never fathomed the icy fjords where they originated. But the real currency of this network wasn't just fur, it was teeth. Walrus ivory, carved into chess pieces and religious icons, became medieval Europe's plastic, lightweight, durable, and endlessly valuable. A single tusk could buy a farmer's freedom or ransom a knight. Recent DNA studies reveal just how far these goods traveled. Ivory excavated from Viking-age Dublin matches walrus colonies near Greenland, while bear fur found in York traces back to Scandinavia's deepest forests. This wasn't random plunder, it was a supply chain as precise as any modern franchise. The routes themselves were marvels of ingenuity. Viking traders dragged ships across narrow portages between rivers, creating watery highways that linked the Baltic to the Black Sea. At places like Hedeby, a bustling marketplace in modern Germany, you could hear Sami herders bartering reindeer hides in one stall while Rus merchants weighed Arabic silver dirhams in another. Slave markets thrived too. Captives from Britain or Ireland often passed through more hands than the goods they carried, ending up as far as Baghdad's caliphate. What's often overlooked is how this trade shaped the land itself. In Norway's Lofoten Islands, archaeologists found piles of cod bones taller than houses, evidence of a fish-drying industry feeding traders bound for distant ports. Even the humble whetstone had its role. Norwegian quarries exported sharpening stones so prized they've been dug up from Dublin to Kiev. Every transaction wove another thread in a web connecting Sami hunters to French monks, Baltic amber carvers to Moorish silversmiths. The legacy of these routes lingers in unexpected ways. Next time you see a Viking chess piece in a museum, perhaps the famous Lewis warder clutching his shield, remember that ivory likely crossed frozen seas, changing hands from a Greenlandic hunter to a Scottish king. It's proof that even in an age remembered for axes and longships, the real power often lay in quiet exchanges of fur, tooth, and stone, the original dark web of the medieval world. A pinch of black pepper seems insignificant today, but 7 centuries ago it could buy a man's freedom. In medieval Europe, peppercorns were so valuable they were counted like gemstones used to pay rent, dowries, and even ransom knights captured in battle. The irony: the laborers harvesting these precious spices in the Malabar coast of India often never tasted their own crops, while Venetian merchants grew obscenely wealthy controlling the European end of the trade. This wasn't just commerce, it was a culinary arms race where flavors held more power than swords. Take nutmeg, a humble seed from Indonesia's Banda Islands. Arab traders spun wild tales to protect their monopoly, claiming the spice grew in guarded valleys patrolled by winged serpents. By the time it reached London or Paris, a single nutmeg could cost the equivalent of a week's wages. The Dutch East India Company went to horrifying lengths to control it, slaughtering Bandanese villagers and restricting trees to just a few islands, where they scrubbed seeds with lime to prevent smuggling. Yet their efforts backfired when a single smuggled seedling, tucked into a trader's walking stick, sprouted in Grenada, now one of the world's top producers. What made these flavors worth such madness? Beyond masking spoiled meat in an era before refrigeration, spices were medicine, status symbols, and even religious offerings. Cloves numbed toothaches long before modern dentistry. Saffron dyed royal robes and sacred texts, and when the bubonic plague struck, people burned cinnamon like incense, hoping its pungent smoke would purify the air. The very word spice comes from the Latin species, meaning something precious, proof of how deeply these flavors were woven into the fabric of civilization. The quest to control them reshaped the globe. Columbus's accidental discovery of the Americas happened because he underestimated the Earth's size while searching for a shortcut to Indonesia's Spice Islands. Magellan's circumnavigation was funded by investors dreaming of clove profits. Even the layout of modern cities reflects this history. Lisbon's Torre de Belém, built with pepper taxes, still watches over the river where spice ships once docked. Today, when you shake pepper onto your pasta or grate nutmeg into eggnog, you're participating in a ritual older than the pyramids, that cinnamon roll. Its lineage stretches back to Venetian bakers who first paired Middle Eastern spices with European dough. The chili in your curry, a transplant from the Americas, rerouted through Portuguese traders to India. These flavors are time travelers, carrying stories of empires risen and fallen, of sailors who braved uncharted oceans for a taste of the exotic. Under electron microscopes, scientists now find something astonishing: pollen grains from Indian pepper preserved in the teeth of Viking skeletons, proving these flavors reached farther than written records suggest. In a way, every spice rack is a miniature museum, each jar holding whispers of journeys that changed the world. The next time you reach for that pepper mill, remember, you're not just seasoning your meal. You're turning the page on a story written in cloves and cinnamon, one that continues to unfold with every pinch. Deep in the mountains of northeastern Afghanistan, where the air thins and the rocks shimmer with secrets, miners have risked their lives for millennia to extract a blue so intense it seems stolen from the sky itself. Lapis lazuli wasn't just a stone, it was a cosmic treasure, formed over millions of years and coveted by emperors, pharaohs, and artists who believed its celestial hue held divine power. From the moment the first chunk was pried from the Sar Isang mines, this Afghan blue began an extraordinary journey, passing through hands that would shape history. Consider the funeral mask of Tutankhamun, its golden surface inlaid with lapis stripes to mimic the stripes of a god's headdress, or the Virgin Mary's robes in Renaissance masterpieces, their rich ultramarine pigment so expensive it was reserved for depicting heaven itself. That same blue appears in Mesopotamian cylinder seals, Chinese Buddha statues, and even Cleopatra's crushed eyeshadow. Each use a testament to lapis's irresistible allure. But here's what's truly astonishing. Modern scientists can now trace a single speck of pigment back to its exact mine using isotopic fingerprints. proving that a fleck of blue in a Caravaggio painting likely came from the same Afghan valley where miners toiled 1,000 years earlier. The logistics of this trade defy belief. Raw lapis traveled by yak across the Hindu Kush, floated down the Indus River on reed boats, then crossed deserts on camelback to Mesopotamian workshops. By the time it reached Venice ground into powder by guild artisans, its value had multiplied 1,000-fold. Venetian merchants guarded their ultramarine monopoly fiercely, creating a pigment so precious that Michelangelo left paintings unfinished when he couldn't afford it. Even rival colors told a story. When Flanders artists began using cheaper azurite, Italian masters sneered, calling it the devil's blue for its inferior glow. But lapis was more than a commodity, it was a cultural bridge. In China, Buddhist artisans carved it into heaven stones for imperial ornaments, believing it warded off evil. Persian poets compared its blue to the threshold between earth and paradise. And in medieval Europe, alchemists obsessed over its golden pyrite flecks, convinced they held the key to transmuting base metals into gold. The stone's legacy even echoes in language. Ultramarine literally means beyond the sea, a poetic nod to its distant origins. Today, the same mines still produce lapis, though now it shares space with modern conflicts. Satellite images reveal pockmarked landscapes where ancient tunnels intertwine with fresh excavations. Yet amidst the turmoil, something remarkable endures. Afghan miners still work the deposits using methods their ancestors would recognize, while artists from Tokyo to New York pay premiums for the genuine article, rejecting synthetic substitutes. That stubborn preference speaks volumes. After 6,000 years, we still crave the real thing, a blue woven into humanity's collective imagination. Next time you see a Renaissance Madonna swathed in celestial robes or an Egyptian scarab gleaming with blue inlays, remember, you're not just looking at art. You're witnessing the end point of an odyssey that crossed mountains and deserts, linking Afghan miners to Italian studios in an unbroken chain of desire. In a world where most commodities lose their magic, lapis lazuli remains eternal, proof that some treasures only grow more precious with time. Long before smartphones or fiber optic cables, humanity had its own version of high-speed connection, shards of volcanic glass crisscrossing continents at the speed of a trader's footsteps. Obsidian, nature's sharpest stone, wasn't just a tool. It was the Stone Age's most sought-after commodity, with edges so precise they could slice through hide or wood cleaner than early metal blades. From the moment someone first chipped a flake from a volcanic flow, this glossy black glass became the foundation of an invisible network stretching from Turkey's Cappadocia region to the palaces of pharaohs over 1,000 miles away. What makes obsidian extraordinary isn't just its utility, it's the detective story it leaves behind. Every volcanic source has a unique chemical fingerprint, allowing modern archaeologists to trace individual artifacts back to their origins like forensic scientists. A blade found in a Bronze Age Egyptian tomb might match the obsidian flows of Armenia's Mount Artani, while spear points unearthed in Crete lead straight to the Aegean island of Milos. These aren't just isolated finds, they're proof of a supply chain so robust it functioned without maps, money, or even written language. The real ingenuity lay in the trade's ripple effects. In central Turkey, the Neolithic town of Çatalhöyük thrived as a middleman hub, where obsidian from nearby Hasan Dag volcano was knapped into standardized blades and traded outward. Excavations reveal workshops piled high with rejects evidence of mass production millennia before factories. Meanwhile, in Mesopotamia, obsidian's scarcity made it a status symbol. Elite graves contained ceremonial daggers too fragile for practical use, their glossy surfaces polished to mirror like brilliance. But perhaps the most surprising revelation is how far these networks reached. Off the coast of Sardinia, divers recently recovered obsidian tools from a shipwreck dating back 6,000 years, older than the pyramids. Chemical analysis showed the material came from the distant Lipari Islands, proving Mediterranean sailors were navigating treacherous waters to secure this prized resource long before the rise of formal empires. Even more astonishing, similar finds in Ethiopia suggest obsidian was traveling up the Nile into Africa while Europe was still gripped by the Ice Age. This wasn't just commerce, it was cultural exchange in its rawest form. Along with obsidian, traders carried ideas, new techniques for tool-making, whispers of distant lands, and even artistic motifs that appear suddenly in far-flung settlements. A single shard could tell a story of volcanic eruptions, daring journeys, and the universal human hunger for the best tools money could buy, even when money was just a handful of grain or a fine clay pot. The legacy of this trade lingers in unexpected places. Modern surgeons still use obsidian scalpels for ultra-precise incisions, their edges honed to molecular sharpness, just as they were 8,000 years ago. And when archaeologists uncover a cache of obsidian blades, they're not just holding ancient tools, they're touching the first threads of a web that would eventually bind the world together. So next time you flip open a pocket knife, remember, the impulse to seek and share the perfect cutting edge is as old as humanity itself. Beneath the crystal waters of the Mediterranean, divers plunged into a world of deadly beauty to harvest a treasure unlike any other: red coral, its branches glowing like submerged flames. To ancient civilizations, this wasn't just decoration. It was the dragon's blood of the sea, believed to hold protective powers so potent that Tibetan monks carved it into amulets and Indian priests embedded it in temple statues. The journey of a single coral branch from Sardinia's reefs to a Himalayan shrine reveals a trade route as perilous as it was sacred, where commerce and spirituality flowed together like tides. Divers faced horrors to retrieve this treasure. Strapping stones to their waists to sink faster, they plunged without oxygen, knives clenched between teeth to pry coral from crevices before their lungs gave out. Greek poets wrote of men surfacing with bloodied faces, their ears bursting from the pressure. Yet the rewards justified the risk. Coral's vivid red hue, unchanged by time or burial, made it a symbol of eternal life. Roman matrons wore it to ward off the evil eye, while Chinese emperors prized it as 100-year red, a shade too perfect for mortal hands to replicate. What's astonishing is how coral's path mirrored the spread of religions. Buddhist traders carried it along Silk Road detours, bartering branches for safe passage through mountain passes. In Varanasi, Hindu artisans shaped it into goddess figurines, their crimson curves echoing temple flames. Mediterranean coral even reached the Americas after Columbus, where Spanish priests threaded it into rosaries for converting indigenous communities, a spiritual currency repurposed across continents. Modern science reveals coral's hidden fingerprints. Isotope analysis can trace medieval coral beads back to specific Mediterranean dive sites, proving that a necklace worn by a Mongol noblewoman likely passed through Venetian merchant stalls. Meanwhile, in Tibet, archaeologists still uncover coral fragments in ancient stupas, their surfaces worn smooth by centuries of devotional touch, the cruel irony. The very beliefs that treasured coral also doomed it. Demand grew so insatiable that by the 19th century, Sardinian reefs were stripped bare, their ecosystems shattered. Today, conservationists work to revive these habitats, even as antique coral pieces sell for fortunes in auction houses, each branch a relic of faith, greed, and humanity's endless hunger for beauty with meaning. Next time you see coral jewelry in a museum case, look closely. That fiery red once bridged oceans and religions, a silent witness to divers who risked everything and monks who saw the divine in a twist of underwater stone. Its story isn't just about trade, it's about how the things we cherish shape the world for better or worse. High in the mist-shrouded mountains of Burma, miners risked their lives to extract a stone so revered that Chinese emperors measured their wealth by its weight. Jade wasn't just a gem, it was the crystallized essence of heaven itself, harder than steel yet capable of being carved into transcendent beauty. While gold glittered in royal treasuries, jade rested against the skin of kings, buried with them to guide their souls into eternity. The journey of a single boulder from Kachin State's treacherous mines to an imperial workshop in Beijing could take years, passing through hands that transformed rough stone into objects of divine power. What set jade apart wasn't just its beauty, it was the near-impossible skill required to shape it. Unlike gemstones cut with facets, jade demanded patience. Artisans spent months grinding nephrite or jadate with sand and water, coaxing out forms that seemed to defy the stone's toughness. A single-by disc, a ceremonial circle symbolizing the sky, might take a master carver a year to perfect. The finest pieces felt alive in the hand, their surfaces polished to a temperature like human skin. Emperors prized this tactile magic, believing jade's cool touch could balance the body's energies and ward off decay. The spiritual significance of jade runs deeper than any mine. In Hongshan culture tombs dating back 6,000 years, archaeologists find jade dragons curled beside skeletons, guardians for the afterlife. Later, Confucius would liken jade's virtues to the ideal gentleman. Its hardness represented integrity, its smoothness, compassion. Even the sound of jade pendants clinking together was considered music fit for the gods. This wasn't mere superstition. Recent studies reveal that certain jade varieties emit faint ultrasonic frequencies when struck, a phenomenon ancient priests might have interpreted as divine communication. No excavation captures jade's sacred role more vividly than the tomb of Liu Sheng, a Han Dynasty prince. When archaeologists unsealed his burial suit in 1968, they found 2,296 jade plaques stitched with gold thread, a literal second skin meant to preserve him forever. Nearby lay jade cicadas placed on his tongue, symbols of rebirth, their wings so delicately carved they seemed ready to flutter away. The prince's wife, Du Wan, rested beside him in her own jade armor, her hands clasping a jade phoenix, proof that this stone transcended earthly hierarchies to promise eternity to all who cherished it. The Jade Road's influence stretched far beyond China's borders. Along the Irrawaddy River, Burmese miners traded raw jade for Chinese silk, creating a cultural exchange that shaped both regions. In Korea's Silla Kingdom, royalty adopted jade earrings as status symbols, while Vietnamese artisans blended Chinese carving techniques with local mythology. Even across the Pacific, indigenous cultures from Mexico to New Zealand independently revered jade like stones for their protective qualities, a testament to humanity's universal attraction to objects that bridge the mortal and the sublime. Today, modern science unravels jade's secrets while deepening its mystique. Geologists can now trace a carved pendant back to its exact quarry using mineral fingerprints, revealing trade routes once thought lost. Meanwhile, collectors still whisper about mutton fat, jade, a milky white variety so rare that a thumbnail-sized piece recently sold for over $2 million. Yet for all its monetary value, jade's true worth remains intangible. When a craftsman in Chang'an spends a lifetime perfecting a single carving, or when a family heirloom survives wars and revolutions, what's being preserved isn't just a stone, it's a covenant between earth and eternity. Next time you see jade, whether in a museum case or a modern necklace, look closer. That unassuming green holds within it the dreams of emperors, the sweat of miners, and the prayers of countless souls who believed, against all logic, that a piece of the earth could make them immortal. It's a reminder that some treasures aren't measured in carats, but in centuries of unwavering faith. The greatest empires in history were built not just on gold or grain, but on something far simpler: tiny white crystals that could mean the difference between life and death. Salt wasn't merely a seasoning, it was survival itself. Before refrigeration, it preserved food through harsh winters and long voyages. Before modern medicine, it sterilized wounds and balanced electrolytes. And before centralized currencies, it served as literal payment. Roman legionaries received their salarium, a salt allowance that gave us the word salary. But the real power of salt lay in its scarcity. Unlike gold, which glittered in rivers, salt hid in just a few places, evaporated from seawater, mined from ancient seabeds, or scraped from dried-up lakes. Control those sources, and you controlled life itself. Take the Sahara's vast Taoyueni Basin, where even today, miners chip salt from underground deposits under a blistering sun. These rectangular slabs, some weighing over 50 pounds, were once strapped to camels for a month-long trek to Timbuktu. There, they traded pound for pound with gold, a transaction so iconic that medieval Arab geographers called West Africa the land of the golden salt. But the Sahara wasn't alone. In Hallstatt, Austria, Bronze Age miners dug shafts so deep they tapped into underground lakes, leaving behind tunnels lined with pick marks that still gleam under modern flashlights. Their discarded leather shoes and woolen caps, preserved by salt's antiseptic properties, offer eerie snapshots of laborers who died centuries before Rome's founding. Salt's influence reached far beyond economics. In China's Sichuan Basin, brine wells drilled over 2,000 years ago fueled an empire's appetite for fermented sauces and preserved meats, culinary traditions that endure today. Celtic tribes in Britain guarded their brine springs like fortresses, boiling the mineral-rich water in clay pots until only salt remained. And in Ethiopia's Danakil Depression, where temperatures soar past 120 degrees, Afar tribesmen still carve salt blocks from cracked earth, loading them onto camel caravans as their ancestors did for millennia. War followed salt as surely as shadows follow light. Venice grew wealthy not just from spices but by monopolizing Adriatic salt pans, using the profits to build its maritime empire. England's King Charles I sparked unrest by taxing salt, a move that contributed to his eventual overthrow. Even the American Civil War saw Union forces target Confederate saltworks, knowing starvation would follow their destruction. The eerie remnants of these battles linger in places like Ivory Island, Louisiana, where crumbling Civil War-era vats stand beside modern salt mines. Today, abandoned salt mines have become time capsules. Beneath Poland's Wieliczka mine, chapels carved entirely from salt rock glow under chandeliers of crystallized halite. In Bolivia's Sala de Uyuni, a hotel built from salt blocks offers surreal views of the world's largest salt flat. And in Iran's Cherabod mine, the salt men, naturally mummified workers preserved by sodium, still wear the rope nooses that snared them during ancient collapses. These sites whisper a truth we often forget. The mundane substances we take for granted once moved mountains, toppled kings, and carved civilizations from wilderness. So the next time you shake salt onto your meal, pause for a moment. Those tiny crystals are more than flavor, they're frozen history, each grain a testament to human ingenuity and hunger. From the sweat of Saharan camel drivers to the calloused hands of Celtic brine boilers, salt carries the weight of countless lives. It's a reminder that sometimes the most ordinary things hold the most extraordinary stories. Buried beneath the rolling hills of Cornwall, a humble metal-shaped civilization's tin, the silent partner in humanity's first technological revolution. Without it, bronze would never have transformed warfare, art, and daily life across 3 continents. But here's the twist: while copper deposits dotted the ancient world, tin was vanishingly rare. A few scattered veins in Cornwall, Anatolia, and Afghanistan became geopolitical hotspots, their locations guarded like state secrets. Picture Bronze Age merchants whispering about the islands of the Cassitarides, mythic tin-rich lands we now know as Britain, where traders braved stormy seas for cargoes that could make kings. The chemistry was simple. Mix 1 part tin with 9 parts copper and suddenly you had a metal harder than either. But the logistics, anything but. Tin's journey from British mines to Mediterranean workshops was a marvel of prehistoric globalization. Archaeologists tracing lead isotopes in Bronze Age artifacts made a startling discovery. Ingots from Cornwall wound up in Mycenaean palaces, Minoan temples, and even the tombs of pharaohs. Shipwrecks like the Ulubur off Turkey's coast reveal the scale 10-ton loads of tin stacked beside amber, ivory, and ebony, a Bronze Age Amazon delivery gone wrong. What made this trade so explosive was its military implications. Bronze swords and armor didn't just give warriors an edge, they reshaped empires. When Hittite kings monopolized Anatolian tin routes, they didn't just grow wealthy, they could literally arm or disarm rivals. The same Cornish ingots that crafted delicate Cretan jewelry also hammered into the axes that toppled cities. This duality haunts excavations. A single tin ingot might bear both a peaceful merchant's mark and the scars of being melted down for weapons when war flared. The real genius lay in the supply chain's adaptability. When overland routes through Europe grew dangerous due to tribal conflicts, traders pivoted to maritime routes overnight. Recent discoveries of tin ingots in Israeli ports prove Phoenician middlemen were smuggling British tin past hostile territories via intricate coastal hops. And in a stroke of Bronze Age irony, some of the safest routes passed through pirate strongholds where raiders turned protectors for a cut of the profits. Climate science adds another layer. Pollen samples from alpine peat bogs show deforestation spiked during peak tin trade centuries as entire forests became charcoal to fuel smelting furnaces. Even the toys of elite children reflected this obsession. Tin alloy figurines from Mesopotamia depict miniature chariots and soldiers, their playthings mirroring the very industry that secured their privilege. The legacy of this forgotten trade lingers in plain sight. The word bronze itself comes from the Persian birinj, while Cornwall's tin streams still glitter with residual cassiterite. Modern metallurgists confirm what ancient smiths knew instinctively. The ideal bronze alloy remains 90% copper to 10% tin, a ratio perfected 4,000 years ago. So the next time you see a bronze statue or handle an antique bell, remember, you're touching the end point of a network that connected British miners to Egyptian pharaohs, proving that even in antiquity, technology's hunger for rare resources could bind the world together. In the fiery heart of ancient furnaces, a revolution was brewing, not in politics or warfare, but in something far more fragile: glass. Syrian craftsmen in the 1st century didn't just shape molten sand. They guarded their techniques with the fervor of modern tech giants protecting proprietary code. The secret: adding manganese dioxide to neutralize impurities, creating crystal-clear glass so prized that fragments found their way into Viking burial ships and the temples of Angkor Wat, thousands of miles from where they were blown into existence. This wasn't just trade, it was the birth of a translucent technology that would transform how humanity saw the world, quite literally. Recent breakthroughs in archaeochemistry reveal just how advanced these ancient artisans were. By grinding samples from Roman-era glass shards and subjecting them to spectroscopy, scientists uncovered something startling. Syrian workshops had mastered precise temperature controls to within 50 degrees Celsius, a feat requiring generations of trial and error. Some batches even showed traces of antimony, a toxic metalloid used to create opaque white glass, proof that experimentation was as relentless then as it is in modern labs. The most astonishing find: a shard from a Viking trading post in Sweden chemically matched glass waste discovered in Aleppo, completing a supply chain that stretched from the Levant to the Baltic. The real magic of this trade lay in its adaptability. In India, Roman glassmakers set up satellite workshops near ports, blending local techniques with Mediterranean recipes to create vibrant bangles adored by Gupta dynasty nobility. In China, artisans remelted imported glass into discs traditionally carved from jade, a clever workaround for those who couldn't afford the real thing. Even in the African kingdom of Axum, archaeologists unearthed glass beads so perfectly spherical they must have been spun on rods, a technique previously thought to be a Venetian Renaissance invention. But perhaps no discovery underscores glass's cultural impact more than the stained glass windows of medieval Europe. Recent pigment analysis reveals that the radiant blues of Chartres Cathedral trace back to cobalt mined in Persia, meaning a single pane connected French glaziers, Syrian glassmakers, and Persian miners in an unbroken chain of craftsmanship. The same cobalt had likely traveled the Silk Road centuries earlier as raw ore before being transformed into something transcendent. Today, when you glance through a window or raise a drinking glass, you're participating in a tradition older than the Colosseum. Those everyday objects carry whispers of furnace tenders who stoked fires through the night, of merchants who braved pirate-infested waters to deliver fragile cargoes, and of artists who turned sand into light. It's a reminder that some of humanity's most enduring innovations aren't just about function, they're about letting us see the world and ourselves more clearly. Long before plastic carved its way into modern life, the world ran on ivory, white gold coveted from the palaces of Assyria to the courts of Tang Dynasty China. Picture an elephant tusk harvested in the Congo, carried by Arab traders across the Sahara, shaped by Indian artisans into delicate combs for Roman noblewomen, then lost for centuries in a shipwreck off Sicily. This wasn't just commerce, it was an obsession that reshaped ecosystems and empires. Recent excavations in Nimrud reveal rooms stacked with ivory panels, lion hunts, and goddesses carved from a species already vanishing when the Assyrians hoarded them, the now extinct Syrian elephant. The scale of this trade defies imagination. In the ruins of Zhengzhou, archaeologists found an ancient Chinese workshop with enough ivory fragments to account for over 1,000 tusks, all meticulously carved into hairpins, ceremonial scepters, and even entire furniture legs. But here's the twist. Chemical analysis proved some ivory came from African forest elephants, not local Asian herds. That means these tusks traveled farther than most people of the era dreamed possible, crossing oceans and deserts to satisfy an insatiable demand. Ivory's value lay in its paradox: hard enough to endure centuries, yet soft enough to be carved into lace like filigree. A single tusk could become a chess piece in Norway, a devotional statuette in Kyoto, or an ivory-hilted dagger in Persia. In Constantinople, Emperor Justinian covered his throne with ivory plaques depicting his military triumphs, while in Cambodia, Khmer kings commissioned ivory seals to stamp sacred documents. The material became so intertwined with power that when the Song dynasty needed diplomatic gifts to pacify nomadic khans, they sent ivory, not gold. Yet this trade carried a dark undercurrent. Roman naturalist Pliny the Elder wrote of entire elephant herds driven off cliffs to meet demand, while medieval Arab geographers described East African ports reeking of rotting tusks, where merchants waited months for enough cargo to fill a ship. The ecological toll was staggering. Syrian elephants vanished by the 8th century BCE, North African herds were depleted by Roman times, and Indian elephant populations crashed during the Mughal era. The tragedy: this cycle never truly ended. Modern forensic techniques have exposed uncomfortable continuities. X-ray fluorescence tests reveal that some antique ivory in museums is actually 20th century poached material artificially aged. Conservationists now use DNA analysis to trace seized tusks back to specific elephant populations, proving the same trade routes that supplied ancient emperors still funnel ivory to illegal markets today. But there's hope in the historical record too. Dig through the archives of Ming Dynasty customs officials, and you'll find surprisingly progressive quotas limiting ivory imports. Venetian guild records show artisans switching to walrus ivory when elephant supplies dwindled. These weren't environmentalists in our modern sense, they were pragmatists recognizing a resource couldn't last forever. Their imperfect solutions whisper a challenge across the centuries. If our ancestors could adapt their cravings, perhaps we can too. The next time you see an ivory artifact in a museum, perhaps a delicate netsuke from Edo, Japan, or an ivory inlaid Bible cover, remember, that creamy surface holds more than artistic skill. It carries the weight of entire ecosystems, the ghosts of vanished herds, and the stubborn human habit of treasuring beauty at terrible cost. The real lesson of the ivory trade isn't just about the past, it's about deciding what we're willing to lose and what we dare to preserve. Copper wasn't just a metal, it was the skeleton of civilization itself, threading together continents long before written history began. Take the famous axe clutched in Ötzi, the Iceman's hand, when he died 5,300 years ago in the Alps. Scientists traced its copper source not to local deposits, but to mines hundreds of miles south in what's now Tuscany. That simple tool tells a staggering story. Even in the Neolithic era, people were moving copper across treacherous mountain passes, trading it over distances we'd struggle to hike today with modern gear. And Ötzi was no exception. Across Europe, grave goods reveal axes and ornaments made from copper that traveled farther than the people buried with them ever did. The real shock comes when you follow the copper trail to its sources. The island of Cyprus became so synonymous with the metal that its name gave us the word copper, itself derived from Cyprium, meaning metal of Cyprus. But dig deeper and you'll find veins reaching far beyond the Mediterranean. In Oman's stark Al-Hajar Mountains, archaeologists uncovered smelting sites dating back 4,000 years, where furnace temperatures reached 1,200 degrees Celsius, hot enough to liquefy rock. These weren't small operations. Slag heaps suggest Omani copper supplied entire Mesopotamian city-states. Meanwhile, halfway across the world, Native American miners in Michigan's Upper Peninsula were extracting pure copper from glacial deposits, leaving behind pits so ancient they were already legendary when French explorers stumbled upon them in the 17th century. What made copper so revolutionary wasn't just its malleability, it was its versatility. Before iron became widespread, copper and its alloy bronze were the backbone of daily life. A single mine could produce metal for fishhooks that fed families, chisels that built temples, and spearheads that defended empires. The scale of production was astonishing. In Timna Valley, Israel, researchers found 30,000 tons of slag left behind by Egyptian-controlled mines, enough copper to make 6 million axes. And like modern oil fields, these deposits sparked geopolitical struggles. When Pharaoh Ramses III wanted to secure Timna's mines, he didn't just send traders. He dispatched troops, building fortresses to guard the smelting sites like ancient OPEC facilities. But the most fascinating part of this story lies in the unintended consequences. Copper mining required fuel, lots of it. In Cyprus, entire forests vanished to feed smelting furnaces, transforming landscapes forever. In Spain, Rio Tinto's mines poisoned rivers with acidic runoff so extreme that Roman slaves working there had life expectancies shorter than gladiators. Even the byproducts shaped history. The sulfur dioxide released during smelting may have caused the first man-made acid rain, etching its mark on Greenland's ice cores 2,000 years before the Industrial Revolution. Yet for all its environmental toll, copper also connected humanity in extraordinary ways. A single ingot salvaged from a Bronze Age shipwreck off Turkey's coast bears markings, linking it to Cypriot mines, Assyrian merchants, and Mycenaean nobles. In China, Shang Dynasty artisans blended local copper with imported tin to create ritual vessels that still gleam today. And in the Andes, Moche metalworkers perfected gilding techniques that made copper objects shine like gold, a technological marvel that dazzled Spanish conquistadors centuries later. The next time you flip a light switch or check your phone, remember, the copper wiring inside continues a story that began when someone first melted green ore into something wondrous. It's a reminder that the materials we take for granted were once the stuff of empires, wars, and journeys that reshaped the world. Buried deep in the sands of Egypt's oldest tombs, clay vessels tell a story that would make any sommelier's heart race. Georgian amphorae, their interiors stained with tartaric acid residue, prove wine was traveling between the Caucasus and the Nile Valley as early as 6,000 years ago, long before the pyramids rose. This wasn't just a luxury trade, it was liquid diplomacy. When archaeologists unearthed these jars, they found something astonishing. Grape seeds genetically linked to modern Georgian varieties, suggesting winemaking traditions have survived nearly unchanged since the dawn of civilization. The Romans didn't just drink wine, they weaponized it. As legions marched across Europe, they planted vineyards like flags, turning conquest into viticulture. In conquered Gaul, they grafted their vines onto wild rootstock, creating the ancestors of today's Burgundy and Bordeaux. Along the Moselle River, soldiers carved terraces so steep they seemed to defy gravity, still producing Riesling grapes 2,000 years later. But here's the twist: the Romans didn't just spread winemaking, they bureaucratized it. Pliny the Elder catalogued 91 distinct grape varieties, while emperors issued decrees regulating harvest dates and aging techniques, creating what we'd now call the world's first appellation system. Modern wine experts still grapple with the ghosts of ancient vintages. In Pompeii's ruins, carbonized grapes reveal vineyards were trained on chestnut pergolas, a technique abandoned for centuries until modern organic vintners revived it. Meanwhile, reproductions of Roman wine brewed from recipes in Columella's agricultural manuals surprised tasters with unexpected flavors. Fermented in resin-lined jars with added seawater and honey, the result is closer to Ritsina or sherry than anything on today's shelves. At a recent tasting in London, critics described a reconstructed 1st century Falanian wine as bracing, almost medicinal, with a finish that lingers like history itself. The real surprise lies in how these ancient practices echo today. Georgian cuve, every winemaking where grapes ferment in buried clay vessels just as they did in the Bronze Age, was just added to UNESCO's intangible cultural heritage list. In Portugal's Douro Valley, Roman-era stone laguers, shallow troughs where grapes were trodden by foot, are still used by premium producers seeking old-world intensity. Even the shape of ancient amphorae, with their pointed bases designed to stabilize ships' cargoes, inspired modern bottle designs. Perhaps no discovery encapsulates wine's enduring power better than a shipwreck off the coast of Tuscany. There, resting on the seabed since the 2nd century BC, lay thousands of amphorae, many still sealed. When scientists sampled the residues, they identified not just wine, but traces of pine resin and herbs, a recipe matching Pliny's descriptions of tonic wines prescribed for everything from digestive ailments to melancholy. It's a reminder that every sip from a modern glass carries whispers of physicians, emperors, and legionnaires who believed wine wasn't just a drink, but civilization in liquid form. The next time you swirl a glass, consider this. The DNA of those grapes connects you to a Neolithic farmer in the Zagros Mountains, a Phoenician merchant haggling in Tyre's harbors, and a Roman centurion dreaming of vineyards back home. In a world where so much has changed, wine remains a time traveler, one whose vintage isn't measured in years but in millennia. Beneath the turquoise waters of the Persian Gulf, a treasure bloomed not from rock or reef, but from the soft flesh of living creatures, pearls, nature's perfect accidents. Unlike gemstones carved from the earth, these luminous orbs formed when oysters wrapped irritation in layers of nacre, transforming grit into glory. By the time a pearl reached a Maharaja's turban or a queen's crown, it had passed through hands stained with salt and sweat, its journey spanning from the seafloor to the highest echelons of power. The Gulf's pearling beds were so prolific that ancient Mesopotamians called them the fish's eyes, believing the ocean itself winked up at them through these glistening spheres. Diving for pearls was no romantic adventure. It was a descent into darkness with death as a constant companion. Enslaved divers, often bound by debt or force, plunged up to 30 meters on a single breath, their noses clipped with tortoiseshell clasps and weights strapped to their feet to speed their fall. Below, they groped blindly in icy depths, frantically stuffing oysters into bags before their lungs gave out. Many never resurfaced, their bodies claimed by sharks, jellyfish, or the ocean's crushing embrace. Those who survived faced ruptured eardrums, decompression sickness, and spines bent by years of relentless pressure. Yet the pearls they harvested became symbols of purity, adorning the crowns of Empress Eugenie of France and the Nizams of Hyderabad, their origins erased by the time they glittered in royal courts. Along the Gulf's coastline, the skeletal remains of pearling cities whisper of this brutal alchemy. In Bahrain, the crumbling courtyards of Muharraq once thrived with pearl merchants haggling over seed pearls small as poppy seeds, while in Qatar, the abandoned stone huts of Al-Bida sheltered divers who slept on reed mats, their dreams haunted by the sea. These ghost towns hold eerie relics, ledgers scribbled with divers' debts, wooden scales that measured pearls against grains of rice, and tiny brass sieves used to sort gems by size. The most poignant find, strands of imperfect pearls discarded by traders but cherished by divers' families as the only keepsakes of lives lost to the waves. What made Gulf pearls so coveted wasn't just their luster, it was their rarity. Unlike modern cultured pearls, each was a fluke of nature, with only 1 in 10,000 oysters yielding a gem. The finest, called Orient pearls, glowed with a unique pinkish hue caused by plankton-rich Gulf waters. Persian poets compared them to dewdrops or moonbeams, while Mughal emperors sewed them into ceremonial robes as symbols of divine favor. When a particularly magnificent pearl surfaced, news traveled like wildfire. The legendary Pearl of Asia, discovered in the 16th century, passed from Persian shahs to Ottoman sultans before vanishing into Europe's treasury vaults, its journey a microcosm of the trade's global reach. The industry's collapse came swiftly. In the 1930s, Japanese cultured pearls flooded the market, offering perfection at a fraction of the cost. Almost overnight, the Gulf's pearling fleets rotted in harbors, and divers became taxi drivers or oil workers. Yet the legacy lingers in unexpected ways. Dubai's opulent gold souks still have pearl merchants who test gems the old-fashioned way, rolling them on glass to hear the telltale click of authenticity. Bahrain's National Museum displays a single pearl from 2,000 years ago, its iridescence undimmed, found nestled in a burial mound beside a skeleton. And in the DNA of Gulf families, descendants of divers still carry a genetic marker for the extraordinary lung capacity that once made their ancestors human submarines. The next time you see a vintage pearl necklace in a painting or museum case, look closer. Those creamy spheres are more than jewelry, they're frozen tears harvested from the ocean's depths at unimaginable cost. They remind us that beauty often has hidden origins, and that the most radiant treasures sometimes emerge from the darkest waters. The deep purple robes of Roman emperors didn't just signify power, they carried the scent of thousands of crushed sea snails. In the Phoenician city of Tyre, workers extracted a single drop of dye from each murex shellfish, leaving behind mountains of shells so vast they became archaeological landmarks. This wasn't just color, it was alchemy, turning the Mediterranean's humble mollusks into one of Antiquity's most coveted commodities. A single ounce of Tyrian purple required harvesting 30,000 snails, making it worth more than its weight in silver. Byzantine emperors guarded its production as a state secret, while sumptuary laws reserved purple garments exclusively for royalty, an early example of fashion as political control. But textiles told more than royal stories. In the Andes, pre-Incan weavers spun cotton so fine that Spanish conquistadors mistook their tunics for silk. The Paracas cultures embroidered textiles, preserved in bone-dry deserts for 2,000 years, reveal intricate patterns mapping entire cosmologies, condors carrying souls to the afterlife, serpentine rivers of creation. These weren't merely fabrics, they were woven libraries encoding knowledge long before written language arrived. Modern researchers using spectral imaging have detected traces of mollusk-based dyes in these Peruvian textiles, evidence that Andean weavers may have independently discovered purple dye millennia before the Phoenicians. The economic power of cloth often rivaled gold. Temple inventories from Babylon show linen stockpiled alongside precious metals, used to clothe statues of gods and barter for sacred offerings. In Egypt's Middle Kingdom, linen became currency. Workers were paid in bolts so standardized that their quality determined rank. A vizier's tunic might require 500 hours of spinning and weaving, its thread count so high it resembled modern dress shirts. Archaeologists tracing these textile economies made a startling discovery. Some Egyptian linen found in Mycenaean tombs contains pollen from plants that only grew along the Nile, proving these fabrics traveled farther than the people who made them. What's truly astonishing is how little some techniques have changed. On Greek islands like Crete, grandmothers still weave on warp-weighted looms nearly identical to those depicted in Minoan frescoes from 3,500 years ago. In Oaxaca, Mexico, Zapotec weavers use backstrap looms to create patterns unchanged since Monte Albon's heyday. These living traditions aren't just historical curiosities, they're time machines, preserving methods that industrialized looms could never replicate. When a Berber woman in Morocco spins wool today, her spindle whorl may be indistinguishable from those found in Carthaginian ruins. Textiles also carried hidden messages. During China's Han Dynasty, silk patterns encoded political allegiances. Certain cloud motifs signaled loyalty to the emperor, while rebellious factions wove clandestine symbols into borders. In West Africa, Kent cloth's geometric patterns served as visual proverbs, with specific color combinations conveying proverbs about wisdom or courage. Even medieval European tapestries held subtext. The famous unicorn tapestries weren't just decorative. Their floral borders contained contraceptive herbs, hinting at the covert family planning knowledge of noble women. Modern technology is revealing textiles' lost secrets. Multispectral imaging on Viking burial fabrics detected traces of saffron dye from Spain and indigo from India, proof that Norse traders accessed networks far beyond their raids. In Turkey, chemists analyzing Byzantine silks found traces of Armenian cochineal insects, exposing a forgotten trade route through the Caucasus. These forensic discoveries rewrite history. When a scrap of cloth in a Mongolian tomb matches Syrian weaving techniques, it forces us to redraw the map of medieval connections. The next time you pull on a cotton shirt or smooth a silk scarf, remember, you're wearing the endpoint of a journey that spans continents and centuries. That humble thread connects you to Phoenician dyers straining their eyes in dim workshops, to Andean weavers threading stories into every knot, to Egyptian temple accountants counting linen bolts like coins. Fabric isn't just what covers our bodies, it's what binds us across time, a tangible reminder that human ingenuity has always extended to the very threads of our lives. Behind every ounce of traded spice, every bolt of silk, lay a darker economy, one that trafficked not in objects but in human lives. The Roman Empire's insatiable appetite for labor filled its galleys with enslaved rowers captured from Gaul and North Africa, their shackles scraping against the same ships that carried Egyptian grain and Spanish olive oil. In Constantinople's sprawling slave markets, buyers inspected teeth and muscles like livestock, while scribes recorded transactions on wax tablets. But this wasn't just Rome's shame. Across the Indian Ocean, Swahili coastal cities became hubs for a brutal trade that funneled captives from Africa's interior to Persian Gulf plantations, where they harvested dates and pearls under scorching suns. The sheer scale chills the bones. Archaeologists estimate that for every 100 ivory tusks shipped from Zanzibar, at least 30 people were marched in chains to the coast. Resistance flared in the unlikeliest places. The Zanj rebellion of 9th century Iraq shook the Abbasid Caliphate to its core when enslaved East Africans rose up, transforming marshlands into fortresses. For 14 years, these rebels, many skilled in metallurgy and warfare, forged weapons from their chains and nearly toppled Baghdad itself. Meanwhile, in the Mediterranean, escaped slaves known as Maroons established hidden communities from Sicily to Sardinia, their descendants still bearing traces of African ancestry in their DNA today. Even the Vikings, often portrayed as ruthless slavers, had their own abolitionists like the Icelandic poet Egil Skallagrimsson, who ransomed enslaved families with his silver rather than sell them. The economic ripples of this trade reshaped continents. Venice's rise as a maritime power wasn't built on spices alone. Its merchants trafficked Slavic captives, the origin of the word slave, to Islamic markets, while Genoese bankers insured human cargo alongside silks. In Timbuktu's archives, invoices reveal that a single educated enslaved scribe could fetch twice their weight in gold, creating perverse incentives for raids on scholarly centers. The infamous triangle trade of later centuries had ancient precedents. Phoenician ships carried British tin to Africa, exchanged it for captives, then sold both in the Mediterranean for Mediterranean wine and olive oil, a brutal cycle masked by the glitter of luxury goods. Yet fragments of stolen lives persist against all odds. In Rome's Colosseum, graffiti scratched by a Thracian gladiator reads simply, "I was sold here." On the island of Delos, where traders boasted of moving 10,000 people per day, archaeologists unearthed tiny figurines, crude dolls carved by enslaved children from broken amphorae. Most haunting of all are the slavery beads, glass baubles used as currency in the Trans-Saharan trade, still found scattered near desert wells, their bright colors fading but their terrible purpose never forgotten. This shadow network's legacy lingers in plain sight. The Swahili word how for sailing vessels shares roots with the Arabic term for to drag, a grim nod to human cargo. Portuguese azulejo tiles decorating palaces trace their cobalt blue to Moorish workshops staffed by enslaved artisans. Even the word tariff comes from the Arabic tarifa, meaning a list of duties first applied to taxes on human chattel. These linguistic ghosts remind us that the arteries of ancient commerce carried more than goods. They pulsed with stolen dreams, resilience, and the unbreakable will to survive. Quietest revolution in history began with a pulp of mulberry bark and hemp fibers. While emperors obsessed over silk and spices, Chinese artisans perfected paper, a deceptively simple innovation that would ignite intellectual wildfires across continents. In 7th century Samarkand, captured Chinese papermakers bartered their lives for knowledge, teaching Muslim craftsmen to transform rags into folios under the watchful eyes of Abbasid caliphs. Within decades, Baghdad's House of Wisdom buzzed with copied Greek texts on this new medium, while European monasteries still scraped precious words onto fragile parchment. The difference was staggering. Where a single Bible required the skins of 200 sheep, a paper mill could produce enough sheets in a day to record every play Shakespeare would ever write. Paper didn't just carry words, it accelerated them. When Mongol horsemen sacked Baghdad in 1258, they unknowingly scattered scholars carrying paper recipes like intellectual shrapnel. These refugees seeded workshops from Damascus to Toledo, where Jewish, Christian, and Muslim scribes collaborated on translations that would fuel the Renaissance. A single manuscript of Archimedes' lost works, copied onto paper in Constantinople, eventually inspired Galileo's experiments centuries later. The numbers tell the story. Before paper reached Europe, the largest library held 4,000 volumes. By 1400, Florence's booksellers stocked 10 times that amount, many cheap enough for merchants to afford. The real magic lay in paper's democratic power. In medieval China, printed examination papers let talented commoners challenge the aristocracy. Along the Silk Road, Persian poets scribbled verses on scraps sold for pennies in bazaars. And when Gutenberg combined paper with movable type, he didn't just print Bibles, he unwittingly armed Martin Luther with pamphlets that fractured Christendom. A telling archaeological find. Buried in a Cairo synagogue storeroom, researchers discovered hundreds of paper fragments, shopping lists, divorce decrees, children's drawings, proving literacy had trickled down to households centuries earlier than once believed. Yet paper's journey wasn't without irony. The same Mongols who destroyed Baghdad's libraries later adopted paper money from the Chinese, creating an inflation so catastrophic their empire collapsed under the weight of worthless notes. Venetian merchants, initially suspicious of this cloth parchment, became its greatest distributors, shipping reams to scribes from Bruges to Byzantium. Even the watermarks left by European papermakers served a secret purpose, not just branding, but covert quality control, with their visibility revealing inconsistencies in sheet thickness. Today, when you turn a page in a paperback or jot a grocery list, you're handling the direct descendant of those Samarkand sheets. That mundane scrap connects you to Tang dynasty officials drafting edicts, Persian astronomers charting stars, and Florentine bankers keeping ledgers that would birth modern finance. It's a reminder that the most profound revolutions aren't always loud. Sometimes they're as quiet as a brushstroke on freshly pressed paper, waiting to change minds across oceans and centuries. A broken Ming Dynasty teacup found in the ruins of a Swahili palace tells a story no history book could. Its delicate blue and white design, imitating Chinese patterns yet modified with African motifs, reveals a conversation that spanned oceans. But this wasn't just about aesthetics. Ceramics were the ancient world's most durable diplomats, carrying technological secrets and cultural values wherever they traveled. In kilns from Jiangxi to Iraq, artisans experimented with glazes and clays, their innovations spreading faster than empires could conquer. Take the humble yet revolutionary Roman oil lamp. Mass-produced in Italian workshops using molds, these lamps flooded markets from Britain to Syria, standardizing light itself across the empire. But here's what's fascinating. Buried in Scottish forts, archaeologists found lamps stamped with the mark of Modestus, a Campanian manufacturer, proof that even Rome's frontier soldiers preferred brand-name lighting. Meanwhile, in Persia, potters reverse-engineered Chinese celadon by adding cobalt to local clays, creating imitations so convincing they confused collectors for centuries. Ceramic shards often outlived the civilizations that made them. At Suraf, an ancient Persian port, excavations revealed Chinese Changsha ware alongside Iraqi lusterware, all piled in the homes of merchants who likely never met their makers. The real surprise, chemical analysis shows some Chinese ceramics were actually local copies, produced after immigrant potters taught Persian artisans their techniques, an early example of outsourced manufacturing. Similarly, in 9th century Thailand, kilns near Si Sachanalai began producing stoneware identical to Vietnamese wares, complete with dragon motifs to cash in on the export market. The social power of ceramics goes beyond trade. In elite Maya tombs, vessels weren't just containers, they were metaphysical passports painted with glyphs guiding souls through the underworld. Greek symposium cups decorated with scenes of revelry taught drinkers how to behave even as they got drunk. And in medieval Japan, Roku tea bowls became sacred objects, their imperfections embodying Zen ideals in clay. A single cracked bowl used in a 16th century tea ceremony might be preserved in silk-lined boxes for generations, while golden chalices were melted down without a second thought. Technology transfer happened at the kiln's mouth. When Korean potters captured during the Imjin War were brought to Japan in the 16th century, they didn't just make vases, they jump-started an entire industry. Their secret climbing kilns modeled after Korean designs, which reached higher temperatures and produced the exquisite Arita porcelain that later flooded European markets. Similarly, when Moorish potters fled Spain during the Reconquista, they took tin glazing techniques to Italy, birthing the Majolica tradition that would inspire Delftware and even colonial American pottery. Perhaps no find illustrates ceramics' connective power better than the Belitung Shipwreck off Indonesia. Beneath the waves lay a 9th century Arab how packed with 60,000 Chinese ceramics, including imperial quality bowls never before seen outside palace collections. But here's the twist. Some dishes featured Arabic inscriptions painted by Chinese hands, while others bore lotus motifs tailored to Javanese tastes. This wasn't just cargo, it was a floating focus group, proving ancient potters customized wares for markets they'd never visit. Today, when you drink from a coffee mug stamped with "Made in China" but bought in Berlin, you're part of a tradition older than the Silk Road. That humble cup connects you to Mesopotamian merchants stamping cylinder seals onto wet clay, to Edo-era artisans perfecting enamel glazes through trial and error, to factory workers in Staffordshire who once fed the world's appetite for willow pattern plates. Ceramics remind us that globalization isn't a modern invention, it's as old as the first potter who ever wondered, what if someone across the mountains might like this too? A Roman denarius buried in a Tamil merchant's hoard tells a silent story of power and persuasion. These small metal discs weren't just currency, they were the ancient world's most portable propaganda machines. Imagine a Roman coin reaching the shores of India, its surface bearing the stern profile of Emperor Tiberius. To a local trader, it wasn't just silver, it was a miniature billboard announcing Rome's might across continents. The Athenian owl coins traveled even farther. Archaeologists have dug them up from Egyptian marketplaces to Mesopotamian shipwrecks. Their iconic goddess Athena design so trusted that they circulated for centuries after Athens itself fell from prominence. What makes these coins revolutionary isn't just their reach, it's what modern science reveals about their hidden narratives. X-ray fluorescence scans expose the dirty secrets of ancient economies. Roman denarii gradually shrank from nearly pure silver to barely 50%, a slow-motion crisis hidden beneath imperial busts. Some silver coins found in Viking hoards turned out to be clever forgeries, copper cores plated with just enough precious metal to fool merchants. In Afghanistan, a stash of Greek-style coins bore the face of King Kanishka but were minted with silver from Spanish mines, proving even rival empires relied on the same bullion pipelines. This was globalization in your pocket. Chinese Banliang coins traded hands along the Silk Road, not for their purchasing power but their predictable weight. Merchants would chop them into pieces like medieval Bitcoin. In Africa, cowrie shells from the Maldives became currency so universal that 19th century British colonists used them to pay local workers, continuing a monetary tradition older than the pyramids. Even the Maya, who lacked metal coins, used cacao beans as small change, storing them in sealed jars to prevent counterfeiting, an ancient version of crypto wallet security. The most fascinating twist, some coins deliberately lied. Celtic tribes in Gaul stamped their own leaders' faces over Roman emperors, a cheeky act of political graffiti in precious metal. Parthian kings issued coins pretending to be their Greek predecessors to boost credibility. And when Mark Antony needed quick cash for Cleopatra's wars, he minted coins with wildly inflated claims of military victories, fake news you could literally spend. These weren't just financial instruments, they were psychological weapons shaping perceptions one transaction at a time. Today, when you tap a credit card or send a digital payment, you're continuing a tradition that began when the first Lydian merchant stamped a lion onto electrum. That tiny innovation trust made tangible built networks spanning deserts and oceans, proving that money isn't just what we trade, it's the story we agree to believe. The ghostly outlines of ancient trade routes still pulse beneath our modern world, not as forgotten relics, but as living blueprints shaping everything from cargo ship trajectories to the spices in your kitchen cupboard. Those medieval camel tracks across the Sahara, they've morphed into highways for semi-trucks carrying electronics from African ports. The Silk Road's winding mountain passes now hum with fiber optic cables, transmitting data where once silk and philosophies traveled. Even the humble peanut tells a hidden story. What we snack on today began its journey from the Andes to Africa via Portuguese traders, then crossed the Atlantic again in slave ships, becoming a staple in southern cooking. These aren't just historical footnotes, they're strands in the DNA of our daily lives. Satellite imagery and climate change are unexpectedly resurrecting lost fragments of these networks. As glaciers retreat in Norway, hunters stumble on Viking-age sledges buried for a millennium, their wooden runners still stained with Russian tar. Droughts in Iraq have exposed submerged merchant ships from the Abbasid era, their hulls stuffed with Indian teak and Chinese porcelain. Even space archaeology plays a role. Infrared scans of the Mongolian steppe reveal caravan routes invisible to the naked eye, their buried campfires leaving chemical fingerprints that guide researchers to forgotten trading posts. The cultural echoes are even more profound. That latte you ordered this morning, its journey began in Yemeni Sufi monasteries where coffee was first brewed, then spread to Vienna via Ottoman sieges, transforming from a sacred drink to a global commodity. Words in your language likely hitchhiked along these routes too. Sugar comes from the Sanskrit shakara, filtered through Arabic traders to medieval Europe. Bazaar traveled from Persian to Swahili, while tea split into two linguistic branches, cha along overland routes and tea via Dutch sea traders, creating a phonetic map of its spread. Understanding these connections does more than satisfy curiosity. It reframes modern debates about globalization. When protesters decry outsourcing, they're echoing Roman senators who railed against silk imports draining imperial coffers. The supply chain disruptions we face today mirror those felt by medieval Europeans when Mongol conquest severed Silk Road traffic. Even pandemic parallels emerge. The Black Death exploited trade routes to spread, just as COVID-19 leapt across flight paths. History whispers that connectivity has always been both a vulnerability and a lifeline. Perhaps the most poignant legacy lies in our hybrid identities. The turquoise in a Navajo bracelet likely originated in Persian mines traded through Spanish colonies. The chili powder in your curry arrived in India via Portuguese merchants who'd acquired it from Mexican civilizations. These layers of exchange remind us that cultures have always been permeable, constantly reshaped by the goods and ideas we choose to embrace. The next time you unthinkingly grab cinnamon for your oatmeal or check a container ship's location on your phone, remember, you're participating in an ancient story of connection, one that continues to evolve with every transaction, tweet, and satellite-guided shipment. The past isn't just present, it's still writing itself through us. These forgotten highways weren't just pathways for spices and silk, they were the original social networks, transmitting ideas faster than any modern algorithm. Consider the humble stirrup, a seemingly simple invention that galloped out of Central Asia and into medieval Europe, revolutionizing warfare by giving knights the stability to wield heavy lances. Or paper, which began as a Chinese secret before slipping into Samarkand on the sleeves of captured artisans, eventually fueling the Islamic Golden Age's intellectual explosion. Even something as universal as the number 0 traces its journey along these routes, born in ancient India, adopted by Arab mathematicians, and carried to Europe where it transformed commerce and science. Every time you check your phone's GPS or transfer money online, you're harnessing concepts that once moved at the speed of a trader's footsteps. The real magic lies in how these exchanges reshaped identities. In Uzbekistan's Registan Square, azure-tiled madrasas bear floral motifs borrowed from Chinese porcelain, proof that beauty transcended borders. Along the Swahili coast, excavated tombs reveal Persian inscriptions alongside African gold, their fusion creating a culture neither wholly foreign nor familiar. Even faiths traveled these roads. Buddhism adapted Greek artistic techniques to depict the Buddha in Gandhara, while Nestorian Christian crosses found in Xi'an bear lotus flower bases, blending symbols like linguistic code switching. These weren't collisions of cultures, they were conversations, where each exchange left all parties subtly altered. Today's global tensions often frame difference as division, but history whispers another truth. When archaeologists unearthed a shipwreck off Java, they found a cargo that defied modern categories: Egyptian glass beads beside Sumatran spices, Indian ivory next to Yemeni incense. The merchants aboard didn't see contradictions, only opportunities. Similarly, your morning routine is a mosaic of these ancient connections. The cotton in your t-shirt domesticated simultaneously in Peru and Pakistan. The coffee in your cup first brewed in Ethiopian monasteries before reaching Venetian cafes. That smartphone in your hand, its minerals crisscrossed continents long before they became circuitry: tin from Borneo, copper from Chile, gold panned in West African rivers where medieval caravans once passed. As climate change melts alpine ice, revealing Roman sandals stuffed with insulating straw, or desert winds expose Silk Road caravanserais swallowed by sand, we're reminded that connectivity isn't a modern invention, it's a survival strategy as old as humanity. The next pandemic, financial crisis, or technological leap won't respect borders any more than the Black Death or bronze metallurgy did. But therein lies the hope. Just as Tibetan monks preserved Sanskrit texts forgotten in India, or Abbasid scholars saved Greek philosophy from European obscurity, we too can choose what to carry forward. So the next time you sip tea or scroll through global news, remember, you're part of a story that began when the first brave soul loaded a camel with goods and walked toward the horizon. Those ancient traders didn't just move merchandise, they wove the first threads of a shared human story, and that story isn't over. It's waiting for us to write the next chapter. Want to help unravel more of these hidden connections? Tap subscribe, and let's keep exploring history's greatest collaborations together. Which lost trade route fascinates you most? Drop your pick in the comments, we might just feature it